We are joined today by Canada's first Nightlife Commissioner, Mathieu Grondin. Originally from Montreal, where he was very involved in the nightlife scene. We're going to talk about the role of this new office and his leadership in hosting the first Canada After Dark Summit. Now, this story aims to dispel any illusion that Ottawa is a boring city. Ottawa is the first Canadian city to create an official Nightlife Commissioner position with a mandate that's focused on policy, economic development, and of course, the quality of life after dark. Now, Mathieu has an interesting background. A dynamic career, creative industries and economic development. First, 20-year acting career in television, film, and theater, followed by 15 years as an event producer, a DJ, a director, editor of music videos and films. But in 2017, he founded Montreal 24-24, Montreal 24-24, an organization dedicated to supporting nightlife development, destigmatizing evening activities, facilitating dialogue amongst all the stakeholders in nightlife, and promoting the economic and cultural value of Montreal's nightlife scene. And we know how great Montreal's nightlife scene is. Now, under his leadership, Montreal 24-24 launched the Night Council and published 2 key studies, including Montreal 24-Hour City. And in 21, he convened Montreal au Sommet de la Nuit, a global forum for nighttime governance, drawing over 600 participants and speakers from more than 30 cities. So Mathieu is widely recognized as a global leader of nightlife advocacy, and he's presented all around the world. And in 2024, he became Canada's first Nightlife Commissioner for the City of Ottawa, mandated to implement Nightlife Economy Action Plan and establish Ottawa's first nightlife management office, leading efforts to build a diverse, vibrant, and well-managed nightlife ecosystem in the capital, where, yes, we like to party. So, Mathieu, what have been the biggest surprises or challenges since you stepped into this role in Ottawa, given your background in Montreal?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Victoria. It's been 14 months now that I'm taking the position and moved to Ottawa. And I gotta say, what surprised me when I took the position was the level of engagement and support from the nightlife industry and the cultural scene here. And the different departments within city administration too have been very supportive. I think it speaks to, sometimes there's a lot of appetite right now for mid-sized cities in Canada that want to develop their nightlife. And here in Ottawa, we want to develop nightlife, whereas in bigger cities like Toronto and Montreal, I think nightlife is sometimes a bit taken for granted and associated more with like its negative externalities. So sometimes noise, incivilities. So yeah, I think that's what surprised me the most when I got here was the level of engagement from everyone and how everyone wanted me to succeed. So
yeah, that is great. And the role is often nicknamed or called the nightmare, which was kind of funny.
In English, it's a good wordplay, I hear. But, but I have a French Canadian accent, so it's nightmare. So it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work quite the same way, which is good. So why do you think Ottawa created this role, and what makes it sort of different compared to similar positions in other cities across Canada, like Toronto, Montreal, or even some of the quote-unquote nightmares abroad?
Well, first of all, there are no other positions like this in Canada. It's the first one, and Toronto just announced a couple of months ago they were going to create a similar position. They didn't call it the commissioner over there. It's a project manager. But we're the first city in Canada, so you got to look elsewhere in the world to find other nightmares. And I think it's interesting, first of all, to highlight why it's called a nightmare, and it goes back to the Netherlands in the mid-'80s. In the city of Rotterdam, there was a huge fights between the youth and the police when the clubs would close down at I think it was 3, 4, or 5 a.m. And there was a poet and jazzman from the counterculture over there called Jules Deelder. And he said one day, he was a bit of a public figure too, and he said, the day mayor is not doing anything about this, so I'm going to be the night mayor. So that's when the night mayor got coined, and fast forward to early 2010s, 2012, this term became institutionalized as an official position within, well, it wasn't within, but it was in Amsterdam. A guy named Mirek Milan was appointed by the mayor as the night mayor of Amsterdam because he did a lot of work and with the nightlife scene, and created a foundation, like a non-profit, if you want, around this night mayor position. And over time, this just caught on. And since COVID, I mean, there's been a lot of cities creating night mayor positions, nightlife office directors, nightlife commissioners, night czar in London, in the UK. So right now we're about 100 cities around the world that have these positions. So how did it came to be here in Ottawa and not in Montreal or Toronto first? I think is because back in 2017, the Economic Development Services here at the City of Ottawa was surveying the tech sector, because we have a big tech sector here. And one of the problems they identified was the retention of the workforce, because they had a well-paid, highly mobile workforce, could work out anywhere in Toronto, Montreal, or London. And they had trouble attracting them to Ottawa because of the perception that Ottawa, was not the place to be. So they decided they wanted to compete with that, and they wanted to enhance the quality of life and enhance the attractiveness of the city to attract more, a better workforce and retain their creative talents and their, work talent. So this led them to the Nightlife Economy Action Plan, and with the recommendation number one being to hire a Nightlife Commissioner. And here I am.
Yeah, so I think that goes right into the next thing I was going to ask you. I mean, you've just explained why or how this role fits in Ottawa's broader economic and cultural strategies. I find that very, very interesting.
But partly, and also since COVID, I think we've seen the need to diversify our economy here in Ottawa. We've been relying on the federal government a lot. We have 26% of our workforce that works for the government, mostly the federal government. So, and when everyone was sent back home and could work from home, we saw the impact on our downtown, because not a lot of people live downtown here in Ottawa historically. So, this is part of, diversifying the economy and repositioning Ottawa also as a cultural city, that you can come and visit Ottawa because of its culture. Because yes, it's great museums that's there, but also it's live culture. That's, what's happening right now. It's great music scene, it's food scene.
Yeah, and I think those of us who live here, we know there's a lot going on, but across the country, that may not be the perception. Now, speaking about Ottawa, specifically, you're right about the shift that happened during COVID. And this, of course, did happen in other cities as well, but we had a real sort of hollowing out of our downtown core. And so now we've got people trying to coming back into the office. But the idea was, well, can we revitalize, rejuvenate our downtown core? And of course, and have more people living there and so on. Well, one of the ways to do that is to have a nightlife, arts, culture. I think you and I both know that. So we're pretty excited when, after a bunch of research, the downtown revitalization plan definitely included those things, which align really perfectly with the whole nightlife action plan, the economic action plan. Some of this stuff is pretty ambitious, and you started working on some of these. Can you give us some examples of what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, actually, it's quite ambitious, and I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. Mind you, I think we're pretty close to delivering the 10 recommendations as of today. But some of them will need to be, we'll need to keep working on for a few more years, I think. But we created the Nightlife Council, which is a department-led working group that's part of the Nightlife office. So there's 18 members. 6 of those seats are reserved for cultural and economic development organizations, such as the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition or Ottawa Tourism, the Coalition of the BIAs, etc. And the 12 other members are at-large members. So there are individuals who participated in a recruitment process that was very open. Anyone could apply. We had 500 people applying, and I had to pick 12.
Wow.
And most of these people work in nightlife, either as artists, bookers, program managers. Some of them are program managers, venue owners. Some of them work in public health, in festive environments. So there's a great diversity and also different musical genres. Some of them are from the hip hop, some of them are from live indie bands or electronic music, for instance, the DJ scene. And and we meet 4 to 5 times a year, and they're used to as a soundboard to implement the next recommendations of the action plan. So that's one thing we did. The first thing I did when I took the position last year. And now we just launched this week a website, ottawatnight.ca, because part of the plan was to amplify awareness and marketing of nightlife activities here in Ottawa. People said there's a lot of stuff to do in Ottawa, but we never know where or when it's going on. So we made a directory of nightlife businesses that program cultural content. So, if it's a pub, but it's got a karaoke night or a few of our live bands, it's probably there. If it's not, you can write to us and we'll add your business to the listing. So that's like one part of that website. Another part is more business facing. So we're giving information to business owners or prospective entrepreneurs about permitting, licensing, all the red tape, how to navigate that red tape. And there's also tools around safety at night, because what we're doing right now is a safety plan too, and it's back to school season. So we're going to enhance safety, and nightlife can play a big role in enhancing safety in public spaces. So
yeah, I want to come back to the safety thing in a moment, because I actually think it's pretty big. But I did take a look at that hot off the press website, and I just want to say it looks great. You've got, for our listeners, maybe not everybody knows, but geographically, Ottawa is the largest city in Canada. So we've got a huge amount of territory to cover, and you've got literally from the south, the east, the west. Like it's really, you've done a good job to try to make sure it isn't all about downtown. I know that's one of the things you've heard from some people is, hey, wait a minute, what about us in the southern end of the city or the eastern end of the city? But some of the priorities have been on that downtown because of the challenges that we discussed before. But I really like some of the stuff that you've got there to help businesses. Like you've got some really good stuff there. And I think that's something that other cities could potentially look at and learn from. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you, was to see, hey, you're doing some great stuff. How can we sort of help share that with other cities? So it looks pretty good. And obviously you just started it. Félicitations, congratulations.
We're going to keep adding features. It's just the first, now we felt we were ready enough to go live with it, but of course we're going to be adding more features on it as time passes by. So, but yeah, you're right. It was part of our, decision making to be able to highlight nightlife businesses throughout the whole city. And Ottawa, you can fit Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, I think, in the territory of Ottawa. So just to give people an idea of how big it is, and you have a lot of competing interests depending on where you live. You have people who live in the suburbs, you have people who live in rural areas, and then you have people who live more downtown, and they all have competing interests. And you're supposed to be everywhere and do everything at the same time. But as you said, I think the byword downtown, like for any city, it's the lungs and the heart of a city, and if that doesn't work, I mean, it's going to be highly problematic for everyone. So we need a vibrant downtown, and in terms of its businesses and its culture. So this was a priority for this
Yeah,
year.
and
Yeah.
one of the things I love about the city, the people who live and work here, not necessarily government, is that people who live here really get it. Like our local board of trade is a really big supporter of everything that has to do with entertainment, arts, culture, etc., as are the business improvement areas. And I know some of the other initiatives that you want to do are what we would call placemaking initiatives. And you have come up with a few pilot projects and things that are part to enliven. And maybe you can tell us about one of the ones you launched this summer.
Yeah, we've launched Metcalf Plaza. This was an idea. This was a gap I had identified last year when I got here. I was, one night I was just across the bridge in Gatineau. They have Place Laval, and I was like, we could do something like this in Ottawa. How come we don't have that? And you see that, in many places in Montreal or in Toronto or elsewhere. Why don't we have that in Ottawa? And then fast forward a few months later, two young black francophone entrepreneurs came to me with their project, and it was exactly this. They wanted an open air concept, placemaking project, um, but they didn't really have the capacity the expertise, the experience to deliver the project, and we needed to find funding for this and funding partners. So this, I got to work, and it took us 8 months to find the right partners, find the money, and then the downtown BIA got in, and we found a placemaking business experts that were doing this and could deliver the projects in a speedy fashion in Montreal, and that they had work also in Calgary. So we and Morgard, who's the landowner, was nice enough to just we identified the site, and they were just nice enough to lease it to us for like $1. So it was, it takes a lot of time and partners to make it happen. But when it does happen, what happened is these two young entrepreneurs, what they could do is that they could fill up the space. And this is what you need. It's sometimes placemaking is people think you need to paint a few chairs and put them there, and it's not going to be enough. In 2 years, it's going to be collecting dust in a warehouse. So it's really about creating collective spaces and communal spaces where people can socialize, and you need a community for that. You need people to be able to drive traffic, drive an audience there, drive foot traffic. So this is what happened. And the first night it opened, there was a lineup at 8 p.m. of 100 people trying to get in. There was 500 people inside, and it's been at full capacity since then. So it's a huge success. Just shows the thirst, the appetite of people here, of Ottawans, for this type of stuff here, especially that it's free. I think this is a big thing too. You don't have to buy a ticket to go in. So, and it's for everyone. If you want to come a little bit earlier in the evening with your kids, you can. So it's, and I think placemaking, especially in Canadian cities here, um, or mid-sized cities, you need to develop sometimes what I call the first slot of the nightlife cycle, which is a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Well, the first one is 6 p.m. till 11. And then you have the 11 to 3, and then you have like the D-Pan, the 3 to 6, which is like the late night crowd, the ravers and stuff. This is what I had championed in Montreal. Here in Ottawa, I'm more concentrated for now on developing the first part, because it has an effet d'entraînement. It takes people with you. You're gonna go out. You're gonna have a couple drinks. Then you're gonna realize, oh, it's 9:30. I haven't had dinner. Oh, let's go grab a bite over there. So then the restaurants profit from it. And then you might be, with a couple of friends. You're like, okay, well, let's have a second drink and before we head home. And then you end up dancing. And then whoops, it's 1 a.m. And that's what you're trying to do. Or you might want to catch a piece of theater or go to the movies. So, yeah, I think that's the power of placemaking.
Yeah, I think it's just great. And I was so excited to see that initiative. And it's interesting, going back to why did the city feel it might be a good idea to do this? Um, Yeah, there were some barriers that businesses were facing, right? Nightlife businesses were facing. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what some of those barriers, some of the challenges the nightlife businesses were facing, and the areas where you've focused your energy to help
Yeah,
address some
yeah.
of
Well,
them.
downtown. Well, we have like the Byward Market here in Ottawa, which is another story in itself. But it's kind of like the touristic hub. Also, it's the first place you land as a visitor. It's gonna be the Byward. So, and it's got its own challenges. But Bank Street, this is center town, downtown, and it's more like we call it downtown. It's more like a business district, or it's not even business. It's mostly federal offices. But so this at night can turn into like a dead zone easily, and especially since COVID. Before COVID, we had two great venues on Bank Street, Barrymore's and Babylon, and these two together would attract around 1,000 people at least 3 nights a week. So this would bring a lot of eyes on the street and a lot of people and a lot of vibrancy, and it would help feel safe also. But after COVID, they shut down, and we have a big homelessness problem and open drug use problem. So on Bank Street, so there's a perception of unsafety there. So all of a sudden, this corner of Metcalfe and Gloucester, which was empty and you could feel unsafe walking there at 11 on a Friday night, all of a sudden it's packed with 500 people. So it's bringing eyes on the street. It's enhancing the feeling of safety for whoever passes there. So I think that's also that's the power of nightlife and nightlife vibrancy and culture when it comes to enhancing safety in urban spaces. And because as I've said, a safe street to me, a safe street at night is a busy street.
Yeah. So, one of the things I noticed is on this whole theme of safety is that you have built a really good relationship with the police, and you built a great relationship. You built a sort of your little ambassador group. Maybe you could talk a little bit about
The nightlife
that.
ambassadors, yes.
Yeah.
This is an aware. We call them Europeans call them awareness team. We could call them a harm reduction team. But when I say that, people usually think about homeless people. But it's a team of young people who usually work in social work or are studying in social work, and they're out there in the Byward Market, which is a nightlife hub. There's like dozens of bars there, and they're there to interact with the crowd, bring a positive vibe, act as first line responders if there's a small problem. They have also direct line with the police or the paramedics if needed to. They have a direct line. Well, the security staff from the bars and the clubs have a direct line with them. So sometimes if someone is too intoxicated and they don't feel at ease just kicking them out in the public space, they can reach out to the nightlife ambassadors, and they will take care of that person, put them safely in a taxi. They've got water bottles, snacks. They can charge your phone if you're out of battery. And then you're looking for your friends and you don't have any battery in your cell phone. So that's the kind of stuff they do, and it's something that's Amsterdam pioneered and at least almost 10 years ago. And then Vancouver pioneered it here in Canada. And I'd seen it also in Montreal, and I thought it was, the market was a perfect place to implement such a program.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like a really good idea. And when I had the pleasure of attending your Canada After Dark summit, and I was sitting beside the folks from the police, and they were really, really enthusiastic. And I'd like to talk about this Canada After Dark summit. This is the first Canada After Dark summit. You initiated it in collaboration with the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. And I'd love to know sort of what motivated you to do this Pan-Canadian summit. You brought together voices from across Canada and abroad. You're talking about some of the great practices abroad. What motivated you? What inspired you to bring everybody together from across the country to talk about nightlife?
Well, I think there's a need for this to get us together and share those practices and network and discuss those issues together. And find the most innovative projects. Here and across Canada, there was a need for this. Vancouver has been asking for a night mayor since 2017. Now you have Toronto that had just announced that they were gonna create a similar position. There was interest from Kingston, Hamilton, London, Mississauga. That's just in Ontario. So I think, back in Montreal, I had done the Montreal Nightlife Summit, which was more like about bridging North American and European night culture. So, the club scene in Europe, the club scene in the United States, and bringing them together. Whereas this project, Canada After Dark, was really about, a national forum dedicated to nightlife governance, because this is what it is. You can call it a night mayor, but at the end of the day, it's all about governance and the governance structures and cities getting interested in developing nightlife economy and nightlife culture.
What would you say are some of the key sort of insights or best practices that came up at that summit? You might have seen, there's some patterns of similar things in different cities you're sharing with each other. And certainly the Europeans always have so much to share. Was there some consistent sort of patterns, insights that you would like to share with people who are listening?
Um, yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's an interest now, but in Canada, it's very much, it still is in its infancy, it's its first steps compared to Europe. I mean, they're at least 10 years, if not 20 years in advance. We had a consultant from Berlin coming in and talking about how you can activate waterways as cultural spaces through boats or floating stages, and he was giving like a very classic example, but the Olympic Games and the Olympic Games ceremony in Paris. This is just like a big scale, but you can also do it on a smaller scale. And we have the Rideau River here, the Rideau Canal. There's a lot of stuff we could do in terms of activating our waterways and turning them into cultural events. So that was like one of the interesting, innovative practice we learned about. And I think, one theme that emerged and was that, I think Canada has sometimes we love to talk about, people love to talk about Ottawa, the branding problem of Ottawa when it comes to nightlife. But when I looked at the other cities and I listened to the other cities, it was kind of like a Canadian problem, a branding problem Canada has when it comes to nightlife. People from Vancouver were saying, well, our city is nicknamed No Fun City. And then Toronto was like, well, we're called Toronto the Good as opposed to Toronto the Fun. And then, you have Ottawa, the rolling the car, rolling the sidewalks and stuff. So, Montreal was kind of different, but then again, Montreal has other issues, like the governance problems. So, I think we could benefit from a national strategy on how to help our cities, making our cities more attractive, more interesting, and more active and vibrant at night. I think there's a lot of potential right now, especially in an appetite for this, especially in mid-sized cities, because people think nightlife, they think the nightclubs, the alcohol, the dance, whatever, or the big festivals. But nightlife doesn't have to be just that. Nightlife can be, your local restaurants, can be your local pubs, could be, just a night walk, or a lighting pathways in a creative ways, like just across in Montebello, they have a great night walk in the forest with projections in images of animals and stuff. So it just shows that smaller, more rural cities also can have something to offer. Stargazing can be part of nightlife. Telling stories around the fire can be part of nightlife too. So and in terms of how we develop our tourism, I think there's a huge opportunity there to reposition the country as a whole and our cities by leveraging our cities into nightlife spaces and nightlife cities where there is something to happen. Because of course, when you think about when you're European and you think about Canada, I got this joke, this German guy one day who told me, "Oh, you're from Canada? You have nightlife in Canada? I thought you only had bears and forests." Because that's what we sell. We sell nature, but there's much more than that. There's much more than that in Canada. So yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And we're in, this particular moment in Canada, we're having a look back at what is our identity, what do we stand for, what do we represent. And you're right, there are all some stereotypes that maybe others would have of us, but that we might even have of ourselves. So, which is not necessarily true. Um, just getting back again to sort of your role at the city. I'd love to know a little bit about, obviously you're part of the economic development department. So obviously you're working with those objectives in mind. You're working with community safety issues, which are critical. But there's other aspects which are really important if you're thinking of nightlife, right? One of them is transportation, right? And particularly in a city as big as ours, but many other cities have the same issue. So where do you have, when you're working with your Nightlife Council, or you're working with other departments of the city, how are you able to sort of influence and advance decision making with regards to improving transportation?
Uh, as you mentioned, I'm part of economic development and similar positions elsewhere in the world. Sometimes we're all a bit different. Sometimes it's ag dev, sometimes it's culture. One of my colleagues is from public health. So we all come from a different uh, sector. We're all embedded in different departments of a city. So when it comes to public transit, I mean, it is a huge issue. Again, in North America, there's so much space. And this is also an example, if you want to talk about Ottawa being a big city and it's really tough to move people around with public transit because it's so huge, you don't have enough density and to pay for the investment it needs to be able to have such a public transit. It's the same in Canada, it's the same in North America, it's the same everywhere, except in a few big cities that have this density and have a fairly okay public transit. Whereas in Europe, you don't have that problem. Very few people talk to me about public transit in Europe. At night, a little bit more because some of them are not, they're not as well organized, but still, there is there's stuff I can there's my level of action. There's stuff I can act upon quite easily because I have a bit of funding. And then I can enact kickstart projects. Yes, and then there's my zone of influence, and my zone of influence is my first zone of influence are city departments and services. So, I talked a lot about the role of my position is to be a liaison between all the external stakeholders and the internal departments, but also to develop a nightlife reflex inside City Hall. So, when you have people in housing, can they apply a nightlife Lancer project and be like, and people are like, yeah, well, what's the link to nightlife? Well, if housing is not affordable for artists are going to leave. This is, climate change. How does it link with nightlife? Well, if we have heat waves after heat waves and during summers now, people are going to go out later. This is what happens in hot countries, So if the parks close at 11 p.m., we're going to have a problem. So this is developing the nightlife reflex, and I'm getting more and more traction inside city administration on this idea. People come to me and be like, "Hey, we have this project. What do you think about that? So can you apply a nightlife lens to it?" And then there's my second level of influence, which is the bigger issues and that are not exactly part of City Hall. So public transit is one, diversifying the economy and the housing crisis, the homelessness and public drug use. That's I can advocate a bit, but I cannot act upon this. You already have 3 levels of governments, multiple agencies working on this. So what I can say though is that having a reliable, affordable, public transit is crucial to developing your nightlife economy, because if you can only get to the venue, but you can't come back from the venue, you're not going to go to the venue, or you're going to take your car, and then there's other issues that comes with that, in terms of safety, especially if you're gonna use substances. So yeah.
So, thinking about what we can learn from the Canada After Dark Summit, what we're learning from the experience you're having, I'm hearing it, just for starters, your idea of taking a nightlife lens. I really like that, and even we years ago we began to start to say, okay, take a climate lens on every decision that we make. So now we can look at public administrations, but those of us who are managing our own organizations too can say, well, wait a minute, how do we take a nightlife lens? How do we connect in with this? And I think that's really interesting. And I learned a lot from sort of best practices of what has worked in Europe and so on that we can share with each other at that Canada After Dark Summit. And people who are listening to this may be saying, hey, wow, I didn't even know about it. I would love to know about it. Do you think we're going to have another Canada After Dark Summit?
I hope so. Canada After Dark was part of Capital Music Week, and it was organized by the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. Of course, I collaborated with them on the program and, leveraging my network. But I think this is an essential event. I don't know if we need it every year, but for sure every 2 years. I would love to see other Canadian cities use that brand and use that concept, and maybe that's something that could be changing going from city to city every year across Canada. Could be interesting too. Yeah, but I hope it's going to be back. Yeah.
Okay, so in closing, just to say, what are your next priorities as you're trying to roll out this nightlife action plan?
I think we need more placemaking projects, and we need to keep developing new nightlife products, and especially those that might have a touristic appeal. Because that's the game. But this is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be. We might be able to develop one or two of these new products that will be sustainable in the mid or long term every year or 2 years. So it's going to take a while to get enough and bring the level of activity I'm looking to have here in Ottawa. And then next year, we're going to start working on the next Nightlife Economy Action Plan, because this plan ends with the elections here in Ottawa in fall 2026. So we'll need a new plan, and I hope this plan can be adopted by council and can maybe be a bit. This one was a bit 2 or 2.5 years. Maybe the next one could be 4 or 5 years. It'd be interesting, and I'm going to help. I'm going to work with the Nightlife Council, and we're going to start engaging again with the stakeholders and the nightlife businesses and participants, and hear what do they want to do and what can we change, and some stuff I'm sure we'll still be working on, because it's a never-ending thing. The way I see this, it's like a garden, it's not something you can, okay, we're going to fix it, and then 2 years later it's done. It's like a garden. Every year you need to water your plants, take out the bad weeds, add a little bit of fertilizer. And what we started in the last 2 years and a year and a half now is basically like taking out the rocks and making the soil more fertile. And then we're planting the seeds, and now we just saw it's coming up now. Metcalfe Plaza was one. The Nightlife Ambassadors, and there's more coming. I hope to be able to make another good announcement before the end of this year. So yeah, I'm very excited about the future here in Ottawa.
Well, fabulous to get to know you, Mathieu, and I hope the people who are listening and watching will find what you're doing inspiring, and more cities, more communities across the country will put their nightlife plans into action. Merci, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And that wraps up this edition of At the Mic au Micro, a podcast of Arts Consultants Canada. For information on Arts Consultants Canada and our members, please check us out online at artsconsultants.ca. To send us feedback or questions or anything you hear in this podcast series, please email us at podcast@artsconsultants.ca. And you can check out our show notes in the podcast for links mentioned during the program. Thank you so much for joining us at the mic. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on Arts Consultants Canada's YouTube channel, as well as Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Et notez bien que quelques épisodes sont en français. Until next time, thanks for listening. À la prochaine.